Thanks. Can everybody hear me all right? Cool. All right. So just a little bit about myself so you don't think I'm just up here ranting. I've been supporting Java architectures for a little over 10 years now. That's mostly on the operations side, and ended up basically transitioning from a system admin role into application operations. I happen to be a big lover of metrics and log files. The JMX browser in AppDynamics is a really fun place for me to get lost for a while. I'm a big believer in that whiteboards are probably one of the greatest inventions for science, technology, just general. We really need to kind of sort this idea out, and words aren't doing enough for us. I do need to mention a few names. The first is Paul McDougall, who's senior engineer at Edmunds. Paul has been essential in getting AppDynamics up and running in our environment. We actually do host our own controllers both for production and pre-production. And getting those things up and running really wouldn't have happened without Paul's drive. Patty Hannon. Patty Hannon is our VP of architecture at Edmunds. I've worked with Patty for over 7 years, and we haven't always seen eye to eye on things. And the classic kind of developer wants to make lots of changes very quickly, and the administrator who wants to try to minimize changes so that they can keep stability going in the environment. Patty and I have butted heads in a lot of ways. But what's happened over time is that I've really begun to change my own perspective on what my role is and what the role of system administrators are, and the whole ops versus dev thing. So I really got to credit Patty for helping me with those changes. A fellow by the name of Ajit Zingaukar in our software engineering team. Ajit has been really good at letting us kind of test out a lot of these changes in the way that we do work at Edmunds. He's been a very good guinea pig for a lot of the things that we've been trying to pilot. A little bit about Edmunds. If you're not familiar with us, we basically see ourselves as the place to go to on the web for anything that you want to know about cars. Whether the interest in researching for a new car, trying to figure out the value of your existing car, understanding whether or not you're going to get the same miles per gallon on this car that you bought today 5 years from now. Anything that you want to know about cars, Edmunds is the place to go to. We originally started out in print in the 60s. Before we hit the web in the mid-90s, we actually had a Gopher site for a while. It's been an interesting transition going from print to the web for us over the years. We stopped doing print probably about 4 or 5 years ago, and we make the web our home now. There are about 475 folks that work at Edmunds right now. About 140 of those are in our technology groups. And right now we're tracking about 650,000 daily uniques to our site. Little background on our architecture. I would like to point out that this picture that you're looking at right now is what our QA environment looks like. We got this picture on the very first day that we installed AppDynamics at our site. And to install and see this in one day was really eye-opening to us. Our core architecture is Apache Tomcat, Solar, and it's backed by Oracle Coherence. Through some radical redesign work over the last few years, we essentially dropped the idea of a traditional Oracle database backing our website. So all of the data that you see on Edmunds is either going to be coming from an Oracle Coherence cache or from a Solar document store. On the inside, some of our internal services, the way that we actually push data up to the website is through a homegrown publishing solution that's based off of ActiveMQ. A lot of the authoritative data sources are still Oracle databases. So our publishing system actually extracts information out of those databases, translates it into like JMS, and publishes it out to the website. It ends up in Coherence or Solr, and the web apps communicate directly with those. We didn't just get here, though. How we ended up with this architecture, I think, actually tells the story of how Edmunds came to adopt a DevOps mindset. Before kind of going into that, though, I think it's important to kind of highlight that similar to when the cloud kind of first became a buzzword in our industry, DevOps has had a lot of misconceptions or some rather ambiguous definition. At Edmunds, when we talk about DevOps, what we're really talking about is the collaboration between our development and our operations teams. Certainly, we have had a lot of technology challenges that we've had to address, with kind of the community's definition of what DevOps is, configuration management, automation, monitoring, and metrics gathering. But the real challenges for us have been more cultural, trying to figure out how to work together properly, how to make certain that everybody's getting the requirements that they need fed to them in a manner that will let us build what it is that we're supposed to build properly. The things that drove us to DevOps, I don't think are unique to anybody. Or rather, they aren't unique to Edmunds. They're something that everybody in some way is having to deal with. Infrastructure growth, communication failures, the need to move faster and be really efficient in how it is that we work. These were all of the things that we eventually started to wrap around that label of what is DevOps. What you're looking at here is what we used to refer to internally as the BAV, or the big ass Visio. You can't see it in so much detail, but there are actually 6 different runways here, production and pre-production runways, including internal administrative services. When I started at Edmunds in 2005, there were 30 servers that made up both website services and internal services. 2005, 30 boxes, okay, probably not a problem. 2006, we started taking on a new initiative to really change the way that we built and developed software for the website. We introduced 200 servers and multiple pre-production runways with a single effort. Now, that was good, right? We were starting to think differently about, multiple release tracks and some level of automated testing, but there was a real problem. The real problem was that with all of these environments and without some higher level of automation in how we provisioned the servers and then kept them in line, meant that system administrators were spending a huge amount of time chasing down what we just refer to as environment problems, right? You put a new piece of code out into the runway and it doesn't perform the way that you want, it's an environment problem, right? Again, I don't think that this is an uncommon situation in our industry, but this was a really, really big pain point for us. Manual deployments. What you're looking at here is what we internally refer to as a battle plan. I'm not certain if you can make it out, but I happen to be the owner of a bunch of these deployment tasks. The way that we used to do deployment at Edmunds was someone from our application operations team, in this particular release myself, would pull an artifact from our build server, SCP it to an app server, pull that app server out of the load balancer, deploy the new artifact, get QA to validate it, and once QA said it was okay, put it back in the load balancer and move on to the next one, right? 8 hours later, we would end up with a done release. Eight hours. This, I got to tell you, was not a fun day. This was filled with lots of problems. What would make it worse is if we got to the end of that deployment and QA had said everything was good, and then a business owner went and started testing for their new feature, and they went, no, that didn't work the way that I wanted it to. And we would start that process all over again. Yeah, good times. Our infrastructure growth has actually been really radical. Like I said, when I started, we were sitting around 30 servers. We ballooned up to 200. We just kept growing. The number of servers didn't always translate to an increase in the number of applications. It actually we just needed more infrastructure to be able to continue to serve the applications. Now, that has started to change. One of the reasons, and I'll get into this a little more later, one of the reasons that we've seen kind of the balloon in the number of servers recently is because we've gotten a little more distributed in our architecture, and we're increasing the number of pre-production runways that we have, especially now that we've gotten some good automation going. Yeah, right now, by the end of the year, I think we're probably going to end up with just shy of 2,300 servers. And if that path kind of holds, by the end of next year, we'll be shy of just 3,000. That's quite a bit for a rather small team of system administrators and app operators. So I mentioned communication failure. I want to tell you a story about what we internally refer to as the Edmunds 2.0 project. In 2007, the business came to us with a challenge. They said, it's really difficult for us to keep up with the rest of the industry when we can only do a release once a month. And the only way that we can actually get new content out to the site is through that release. So, technology team went, you need a CMS. We need to get some way for content to be updated in real time on the website. We happened to realize that we weren't ready to build a CMS solution ourselves. So we started talking to a few different companies. We happened to settle on a company called Day, who had a fairly decent product called Communique. We spent, let's see, probably spent about 6 months integrating that into our application, doing lots of functional testing, making sure that it was really what the business wanted. Business was giving us the thumbs up that we were really onto something. And then, 2 months before launch, then we performance tested it. Now, okay, why wait until 2 months before your launch to actually performance test? Okay, that's a problem in itself, I agree. But when we did, we realized very quickly that this product actually wasn't going to scale. This thing that we had spent 6 months trying to build wasn't going to fly under production traffic. So the engineering team that was building this came to the ops folks and said, what are we going to do? And the ops folks, well, we responded the only way we could. We said, we're going to double the size of our infrastructure, and we're going to throw a hardware caching appliance in front of it. And that worked. It did. We got the project out on time. Business was happy with the functionality that we provided, but there was a real problem, right? For starters, again, we waited just until a couple of months before launch to do performance testing. But the other was a real disconnect between the engineering team that was building this product and the ops teams that were ultimately going to be responsible for supporting it, right? And I mean, let's be real. Doubling your infrastructure for one initiative, that's a pretty expensive initiative. So we stepped back. We realized that we were having a major disconnect in how it was that we worked. I'm happy to say that based off of that experience, some of the other initiatives that we undertook over the next couple of years worked out much better for us. The one thing that we still didn't have quite right was making certain that ops folks were understanding requirements from the time that a product or a new initiative was conceived. That came a little later, but eventually we kind of got that one sorted out. The real turning point, though, what actually got us to really kind of think differently was platform redesign in 2010. In 2010, the business gave the approval for the technology team to essentially stop introducing new features into our code base so that we could rewrite the entire thing. We'd realized that up until this point, we'd kind of just been skating by through a big giant monolithic era that we'd been living with for 5 or 6 years, and we needed to get a little more modular. Java is I don't think it's meant to be run in this big giant application I see nodding your head. It just doesn't scale that well for us. So we wanted to start breaking out this year into much smaller web applications that were easier for us to deploy, letting us make changes in smaller batches and with less impact down the line. Through this process, the relationship between our engineering and our ops teams was actually much better. From probably about April until November of 2010, we built our QA and our beta runways as a team. It was fantastic. The relationships there, we really felt like we were able to shed a lot of those challenges that we were having in the Edmunds 2.0 project a few years earlier. Now these sites, these environments, the QA environment and the beta environment, they were built brick by brick over time. And so they worked really well. They did exactly what it was that we were anticipating that they were going to do. But we had a really eye-opening experience when we tried to actually build the production runway that we were intending to deploy the redesigned website on. It didn't work. We'd gotten better about automating the provisioning of the server. We were automating the deployment of all of these new artifacts. We'd invested in BMC's Blade Logic, so we were getting good at being able to provision the servers. We were getting better at using Anthill Pro and some of those tools to actually push those artifacts for us, so we weren't doing manual deployments anymore. That was great. But because we'd spent that 6 months or so building QA and beta brick by brick, we didn't do a good job of integrating the things that we learned after those things had been built back into the configuration management and the build system itself. So when we went to try to build production, it didn't have a lot of the little things that we had tuned and tweaked along the way. It then took a small team of us about 3 months to figure out what all of those little nuanced knobs that we had tuned and tweaked in QA in order to get it to function. For 3 months, the beta environment that we had really only intended to let external users test for us on a regular basis to tell us everything was okay, it actually served production traffic of the redesign until we figured out how to build that new production environment properly. The bigger piece that was still missing, and maybe that last bullet is mislabeled. It wasn't that there was a lack of collaboration between dev and ops, but there was a lack of cohesiveness between our tools. The Blade Logic solution that was provisioning the infrastructure worked great. The Anthill piece that would push the artifacts, that worked great too. But they didn't work together. There was one team that would push out the infrastructure and they would go, okay, it's all ready. And then the release management team would release the applications, and we thought, hey, that's a hell of a lot better than where we were, but it was still not completely tied together. So how did we actually begin making DevOps happen? In truth, there were a lot of us that just spent too much time in a war room. I don't know, if you've spent a lot of time in a war room, that place can end up smelling pretty bad. It's a crufty location to live at for a while, right? Imagine living in a war room style for like 3 months. I'm pretty sure that war room that we worked out of to get the first prod environment had to be shut down and aired out for a couple of weeks once we were wrapped up with it. So it was really the tech leads, myself included, that walked away from that experience going, we know that there's a better way. We know that there's a better way. And we didn't quite identify it as DevOps, right? I think the term itself kind of came a little later, but the objective that we had in mind fit very much in alignment with what we ended up hearing later in the industry from folks like Patrick Dubois and Andrew Schaefer. But how did we do it? Look, in an organization of our size that has operated in a particular manner for a really long time, it's tough to change culture. Damon Edwards at DTO has talked quite a bit about the idea that you have to start by changing behaviors. And over time, those behavioral changes end up moving your culture in the direction that you want it to go. And that's actually been very true for how it is that we work. The production engineering team that I had was probably the first group within Edmunds that we would call a DevOps team. Given my background in application operations and working very closely with our developers, getting new services out to the site, the way that we thought that we would approach this was essentially put up a team between the dev and the ops groups, and we would begin to try to sort through the mess of linking these things up. Now, I have to say in retrospect, it might not have been the right idea to build yet another silo, right? The idea of DevOps and greater collaboration is essentially to get these two groups functioning together. But again, in an organization like ours where change can take time, change can meet some resistance and be a little tough, we needed an intermediary step. And so production engineering happened to be the first group to do that. After the creation of production engineering, we actually saw the spin up of another group in our development team that they called automation engineering. And automation engineering paired with production engineering have essentially bridged that gap and brought the tooling together so that infrastructure provisioning and our artifact deployment now happen cohesively. One of the things that was actually very important in making that relationship work was kind of shedding that preconception of who was supposed to be doing what. I've heard it quite a bit today that it doesn't matter what your title is, it doesn't matter what group you work for. We're technologists, we're out to solve problems, and that made a very big difference in how it was that we were able to kind of make some of these transitions. Let me talk a little bit about the tooling that we use inside. Usual suspects, email, Jabber. We've come to rely on Google Hangouts a little bit more as we move into a row type environment or a results-only work environment, which basically means that a lot of us get to work at home a lot more than we used to. Through all of that, I kind of hinted at the top of this that I'm a huge fan of whiteboards, and I really don't think that there is any easier way to clear up a misconception than when somebody gets up and grabs that marker and starts diagramming on the whiteboard. I don't think anything beats a whiteboard, except for beer, right? Going out for beer with your comrades, especially after a grueling day of trying to get that incident resolved or getting that release out the door, that works wonders. So yeah, okay, beer over whiteboard.
Have you ever taken a whiteboard to the bar?
Funny story. So down the street from us in Edmunds, at Edmunds, there is a bar that is called the Daily Pint. It happens to be on Pico Avenue in Santa Monica. Daily Pint we refer to as the Pico office. The one rule about going to the Pint is that you can't make an official decision. You can argue through a lot of the design, all right, but you can't walk away from the Pint having made an official decision without bringing it back to the office and running it by everybody else. Whiteboard at the bar, I like that. One of our other big collaboration tools is Splunk. We've been Splunk users since the 3.0 days. I've done a lot of different talks about our use of Splunk. I think it's a fantastic tool. What you're looking at here is a performance dashboard that our QA teams have put together. What we do for synthetic load testing is a lot of highly tuned JMeter scripting. And all of that output is then indexed into Splunk, and we project up these pretty nifty dashboards to kind of make clear what our performance test results are. A couple of months ago, I'd been talking to a bunch of the folks here at AppDynamics about things that I would like to see in AppDynamics. And one of the things that I said was, I want you to link these two tools together. These are my favorite tools to work with whenever I have a problem. And I sat on the phone and gave an example of a use case. I think that was sometime in July. And a couple of weeks ago, out at the Splunk conference, I got a really cool demo of exactly what it was that I was describing having come to life. That was really cool. It was really cool to be on the phone 1 month and then right after that, see it working. And that was just fantastic. Watching these two tools work together is going to go a really long way for us. So thanks to everybody that made that happen. One of the other tools that we use internally is a tool by a company called SL Core. This is a tool called RTView, and we use this for monitoring the health and performance of our coherence infrastructure. If you've never worked with coherence before, coherence can sometimes be a little finicky, and you need to keep really close tabs on things like what the communication between the nodes are, whether or not you're losing objects out of any of your caches in the cluster. So we've relied on RTView quite heavily for the last few years to really keep us in tune with what's going on there. We are actually in the process of replacing this tool with AppDynamics. So maybe sometime over the next few months, I could come back and give you some screenshots of what our coherence infrastructure actually looks like in AppDynamics. So the value of AppDynamics for a DevOps type culture. Look, like I said, up until 2009, we had a monolithic gear. There were actually 2 web applications that made up the entire website. There were only about 50 hosts in the runway. This actually wasn't too tough for us to monitor regularly. We were big fans of JConsole, Visual VM, JProfiler, all of the kind of, out of the really kind of what I think of now as rudimentary tools for monitoring Java apps. And then in 2010, the explosion up to 30 web apps and 200 hosts per runway made it really tough for us to see what was going on in the environments. There's just a huge amount of touch points, right? And the idea of attaching visual VM to 5 or 6 web apps in your environment and then just waiting for something to happen really wasn't appealing to us at all. So AppDynamics has been really good at helping give us a view into that much more distributed architecture and not having to really pay attention to things all the time because it's doing a really good job of snapping something whenever we're having an issue. The other thing that it does is it gives us a way to speak a more common language. Instead of talking about our feelings and what we feel is going on or what we might think is going on, AppDynamics gives us the data to back that up. I've been mentioning to a few folks here that one of my observations now is that instead of the arguments being about feelings, we're now actually having arguments about data, right? Everybody agrees on what the data is, but there are now beginning to be disagreements about what the data means, right? And how it is that we're interpreting the data. I actually find that to be a much healthier discussion because, at least it's data instead of feelings. Look, AppDynamics is a great tool in production. It's saved us a huge amount of money and time in down services in production because our web operations teams actually use it as part of their knock display in their area of the building. We've even been able to prevent a few incidents because we can begin to see hotspots showing up in the production runway and deal with them before they become larger issues. So it's been great there. But I feel like the bigger value is in pre-production, where we use it in our QA environment and we're able to see things before they get to production. A really interesting example has actually happened over the last couple of weeks. We were performance testing our inventory web application, and we happened to notice that the response times of this web app went up by 111%. And yeah, 111% had a lot of folks scratching their heads. So, AppDynamics to the rescue. It was really clear right off the bat that a 559 millisecond response time was not actually anything that any of us thought was good. The 195 milliseconds being spent in solar probably isn't all that great either, but that was only 25% of the call. So what was really going on there? Well, what was really happening was the web app would go and make the call to solar. It would come back. But then it would spend a huge amount of time filtering through the response that it got. Okay, that's probably not too big of a problem, but it's still the high response times, right? The HTTP call clearly showed us the query that this web app was making to the solar infrastructure. And when we took that URL out of AppDynamics and put it in a browser, the response came back fairly quickly. So we were like, all right, still not a solar problem. But wow, that's a lot more data back than we were expecting. So what's the story? The story was, and sorry, the text is a little small here, but what we found out was that our performance test, our synthetic test, had actually increased the radius of the search for the inventory that we were asking for. Normally, this test would ask for, give me back all of the vehicles within a 30-mile range of this particular area. and somebody had mucked up the test and was now asking for 8,000 miles. So, not bad though, right? Because we caught it in pre-production, and we caught it with AppDynamics. Yeah, again, to me, one of the bigger values is what it is that we're able to see before we start blowing things up in production. So having AppDynamics in pre-production, to me, is of such huge, huge value. Really quick, we recently sat down and did kind of an ROI check with some of the folks at AppDynamics. What we were able to piece together very quickly, and as you can tell from these numbers, it was a good investment. I can tell you that the amount of time that we are saving in tracking down issues, both in production and pre-production, has just been phenomenal. You know, what probably used to take us, 4 or 5 people days in trying to resolve what might ultimately be a very minor issue with large impact, has now been reduced to days, or a day of people power. In pre-production, it's exactly the same thing. So absolutely a wise investment for us. Let me tell you a little bit about our deployment pipeline and kind of where we're going with all of it. So similar to a couple of the other examples that you've heard today, we are very heavily invested into Jenkins and Artifactory. We have built our own homegrown orchestration solution that is watching for successful builds coming out of the artifact repository and then kicking off a set of unit testing. We are nearing the point where performance testing is becoming a part of that pipeline as well. Assuming that everybody's passing their test cleanly, we'll start bumping you up into our development environment, and if everything checks out okay there after a short period of time, we'll push you up to our QA environment. Right now, that's where we're stopping. We are still solidifying a lot of the testing. We're trying to be honest, we're trying to get people to think quite a bit differently about how it is that they've traditionally worked. For a number of years, we had a traditional QA team that would qualify all of these things and say it's good to go, and then you could promote up. And getting that kind of mind shift will still continue to be a little bit of a challenge for us for a while. As you can see, we do have multiple production runways. One of these runways is taking 100% of traffic at all times. The other are essentially considered backup or standby environments. One of these environments, the stage environment, is usually in some state of shift. We work on a 3-month release cycle, and 1 week out of that release cycle, we actually do open up the continuous delivery pipeline all the way up into stage so that we can begin some external performance testing as well. Eventually, we do see this pipeline spraying to all 3 environments in a live manner. I'm not certain if I mentioned it before, but we do have 2 separate AppDynamics controllers. One controller actively monitors all 3 production environments, where the other controller is strictly for our QA runway, where we do our primary performance testing. So where is DevOps going at Edmunds? I'm actually a very big believer in a lot of the models that I continue to hear from different shops, Netflix included. The idea that the developer that built the service should actually be the developer that is responsible, or should be the individual that's responsible for that service once it hits production. I got to tell you, this has been a really big shift in my own thinking from how I've worked as a system administrator or an AppOps guy for a number of years. Ajit, who I had mentioned earlier, is actually the first developer that I have ever granted production level access to be able to deploy his own code, manage his own servers, and even provision the infrastructure that it works I really believe in that. I think that is where we are going. A developer on call is more likely to fix the problem than to just go, there's an ops guy to deal with it. I see our ops teams transitioning to be platform providers. There are lots of different pieces of our infrastructure that I think at some point in time will end up with an API that the ops team has developed to begin offering good automation services to the development team so that they can begin writing their own hooks into things like DNS as an example. That's kind of hot on my brain right now. We have actually already built services to auto-manage our load balancers with an API that our applications can use. I think that's pretty much the direction that our ops folks are going. I really want to see our operations teams getting out of the business of supporting the applications on the website and thinking more about providing services to engineers and getting software builders to begin managing things on the website themselves. I got asked to kind of put together a list of some reasons that I think DevOps might fail. These are from my own personal experience. So the first is an absence of trust. Seriously, no trust and you're not going anywhere fast. A rigid view of roles. You really have to abandon the idea that I'm a developer and I don't manage a system. And likewise, I'm a system administrator, I'm the one that controls that system. Let it go. Just let it go. We're technologists. We should be figuring out how to work in different areas together. Incomplete tooling. This has actually been something that we've ended up having to figure out over time, but it wasn't until we began to provide greater tooling that we were seeing some different thinking out of our development teams. Primarily around chef and configuration management, we were building tools that began to that began to leverage that tooling and put some better power into the development teams, and that actually made them go, hey, I can do this. I can actually manage that infrastructure where I didn't think that I could before. Indecisiveness in leadership. Being perfectly frank with you, there has been some pushback in making these types of changes within our management teams, you know, that just continued to cause unnecessary delays in helping us kind of move forward. So you got to have the right folks in your leadership organization that are open to change. But some ways that it would succeed. Be honest. Be honest with where you are at as a company and where it is that you want to go and who it is that's working within your organization, whether they're capable or not of making the type of change that you are talking about. I can't stress that one enough. I really can't. Communicate early, communicate often. Be very clear with everybody about where you want to go with the types of changes that you're asking for. You have to educate them. Not all system administrators understand why it is that a developer might want to make the types of changes that they do. And not all developers, I think, understand the general operational practices that a lot of sysadmins have held dearly for years. There's a reason that ops has worked a certain way. There's a reason that developers have worked a certain way. But that knowledge hasn't been shared evenly. So you've got to sort that out very quickly. Criticize constructively. This has been a hard one. You know, you've really got to figure out how to convey that message without making it a personal attack on somebody. So really, just talk to them about the data instead of what it is that you're feeling, you know, listen. The last one, create champions. I have to admit that at the Velocity conference this year, Jesse Robbins finally gave a name to an idea that I'd had in my mind for a long time, and that was pick somebody on the other side that you want to bring over into your world, or let them do the same with you, right? I earlier called the guy that's been my guinea pig for a lot of these ideas. But to be clear, he's actually been a real champion for what it is that we're trying to drive as change in our organization. So I think that might be it. All right. The timer is running up in positive, but if there are any questions, I'm happy to take them as long as they'll let us.
Some of the regulatory regimes like SOX and PCI like to see separation of duties. How do you reconcile that?
We happen to be very lucky. We are a privately owned company with no intent of going public at any time. So that makes it very easy for us. I absolutely recognize that other shops don't have that type of flexibility. I wish I had a better answer for you, except that we can get by with that. Yeah.
So what do you guys do now instead of the war room?
Well, let's see. Let me think about the last time that we actually had a war room. We only call a war room when there is a rather extreme situation. What we do instead is we bring the issues to stand-ups. And we work through those issues either in the stand-up when a matter isn't pressing enough that we have to do it outside of a daily regime. Or we gather everybody up around the coffee bar and we brainstorm until we feel that we've got kind of a plan of action.
Right, but for those big issues
that
you can't figure out, and the CIO says, let's put the war room together and tags you in there.
No, that type of effort happens out on a floor now, as opposed to in a war room. And certainly there are a couple of incidents that come to mind recently that traditionally we probably would have adopted more of a war room mentality towards dealing with. But we've kind of been given a good amount of flexibility by our CIO, Phil Kotloff, to work through some of those issues in a slower manner, so that we can actually begin to shed this idea that the war room is the place to solve all those problems.
And does AppDynamics then give you that insight and those tools to say, you identify what the root cause is quickly without having a bunch of people in a room to get them to talk?
It's exactly right. It's exactly right. It's very nice because you can go into the JMX browser and you can drag a bunch of stuff together and you can kind of build your case to present to somebody, and it's a little clickable link that you can pass off in email or Java or some such thing. Yeah, so it's actually been very helpful in it has been very helpful in keeping us out of war rooms. Any other questions? Okay, if there's nothing else, please, by all means, something comes to your mind, here the rest of the day. Thank you.